Don't start digging the well when you are thirsty. Start digging the well before you get thirsty. Perimenopause and menopause. A tremendous life change. The deepest system in the body, the endocrine that governs all our hormonal actions, is completely rearranging itself. We don't come out of this one the same. The physical, the spiritual, the emotional, everything is transiting towards a new phase, a new you, a complete new version of you, much like during puberty. And it is very useful to prepare. So, if you're approaching this time, this initiation into wisdom is not a decline. It is a powerful transformation, uncovering cultural beliefs that have shaped your beliefs about aging. This is a powerful transition that is often misunderstood. So, how can we learn to navigate this threshold in power and confidence? With everything that we're carrying, which is rising now to the surface, to be seen, to be felt, to be transformed, and we don't need to suffer through it. Ayurveda is not just a medicinal science with whole mind, body, and spirit approach, but it is also and mainly a preventative science. It is a science that teaches us to live with integrity, to walk in beauty. My ancestors of Ecuador have their cosmovision and their spiritual values and principles. And I think the second most important one is the Sumak Kausai. In Quechua means living in beauty. We're going to learn about this too. It's an indigenous concept that promotes living in harmony with nature and other living beings to achieve well-being for all. It is an alternative to Western ideas of constant development and extraction and profit and commodification and growth, right? Instead, it emphasizes respect, care for nature, and the idea that a good life is based on this relationship. The same thing with Ayurveda. Ayurveda reminds us that all our living relationships have to be healthy and balanced with our gunas, or qualities of the mind, with our doshas, with the 5 elements inside and outside. And this is actually fabulous foundation for menopausal care. So living in beauty and in integrity is now. Late 30s, 40s, moving forward, there is really no turning back the clock. Some parts of this transition may be instantaneous and some may take 5-10 years. But we really need to take space and retreat so we can nourish that internal terrain, much like when we did during our menstrual cycles. In this nourishment really has nothing to do with standing in your power. It is about tuning in. It is about softening. Enough with the girl boss story. This is about taking time to tune in, really, into our inner landscape, but not in a clutter way. So you do things from that space of your most inner essence, and you commit to what truly matters while letting go of what doesn't matter anymore. There is the power, not in the standing in power, but in the clarity from your deep essence, in this cosmic power and an understanding that is not based on ego or personality. So Ayurveda explains to us that we have 4 stages in life, and that can contextualize your life in a very meaningful way. This is a very powerful concept that can make a lot of sense. These are called the seasons of life. And a woman, each one has a different focus, expresses unique strengths, and holds powerful rites of passage. So we begin with springtime, right? From youth to menarche, to early adulthood. This is the season of growth. What in Ayurveda we call it the brahmacharya, the student stage. The focus is on learning, acquiring skills, developing character. From birth to 25, we are in the educational part of life, preparing, learning the basics, attachment, identity, study, discipline, apprenticeship. The flame of curiosity is lit and tended. So Brahma speaks to the divine and Charya to conduct. So this is the stage of moving in alignment with the sacred. In indigenous thought, this is when the child is still close to the veil, listening to the stars of a very lunar nature, walking barefoot on the land. Learning comes not just from books, but from the wind, from the water, from the elders. And this phase is ruled by Kapha dosha. Remember the energy of growth, of sweetness, of earth, of formation. This is when we are sponges and soft. Then comes the summertime. And then we become the creatrix, the fertile years. Create, literally and metaphorically. We call it the grihasta, the householder. This is a fiery time from 25 to 45. Now we are in the gathering stage, gathering wealth, a spouse, children, a career, a profession, all the markers of success in the West. And the focus is on learning, but it's a different type of learning, right? This is acquiring skills and developing character. Each stage has a specific role and function, and which supports the life cycle, the spiritual path even. So in Grihasta is the stage of the householder, we call it. Here the spiritual path is lived through the material world, through marriage, parenting, partnership, creating, building a home, a livelihood. It is the time of Agni, of the fire, of Pitta. There's drive, ambition, often exhaustion. For example, the householder stage is considered the most important because the householder supports the other three stages. In the householder stage, people work to protect, to nourish family. We enjoy worldly life. In indigenous lineages, this is when one becomes the keeper of the flame, a bearer of responsibility, not just for self, but for people, a weaver of kinship, of a steward of land, a protector of memory. The adult learns to move with Aini, with sacred reciprocity. The householder is not less of a spiritual time as the before one or the one that's coming. It's just that in this stage, for us, the kitchen becomes the altar. The child's cry becomes the mantra. Our garden outside may become the shrine. The daily is the divine. And that is the second part of our life. Then we move to the third cycle, which is autumn, the fall, right? Initiation into wisdom years, menopause, the time of harvesting. What did we learn? Life lessons, healing, letting go, sharing wisdom, reorienting our life focus, stepping into leadership roles in aspects of our life where we have gained wisdom. And we call it the Vanaprashta, which means the forest dweller. And this stage goes roughly from 50 to 75. It's kind of like a half in, half out stage, no? And this is a big responsibility now because we have to share what we know with those in the first and second stages. This is a time for service. The name itself means retiring to the forest. So responsibilities are handed down. One begins to withdraw from the world of achievement, of gathering, of acquiring, not out of rejection, but of ripening. This is when the elder begins to emerge. And indigenous thought, the forest is not a place of escape, it's a place of communion. So the Vanaprashti doesn't abandon their people. They deepen their dialogue with the invisible. And the Andes, we might say that we now in this stage walk more with the Apus. We embody that mountain spirit. We become the Hampik, the healer. We're not always doing, but we are now embodying medicine. And what kind of medicine, right? Maybe we've already found what is our medicine. The medicine of silence, of story, of presence. And so this phase is ruled by Vata dosha. Remember the energies of air and space, of memory, of the ancestors. One becomes a threshold walker, kind of. And then we move on to the fourth stage, the fourth cycle, which is the winter time, the crone, the deep knowing, distilling wisdom, a time of the elder, when we become the storyteller and the story keeper, right? And this is from 75 onward. And we call it the sannyasa, the stage of renunciation. But it's not rejection. It is a return, really. It's a dissolving of the ego. It's in Ayurveda is the ultimate phase of detachment, when one lives with minimal needs and maximal presence. And the dharma of this stage is just simply being. It's living a simple life. Hopefully, no. This is when we just all the material possessions that they're irrelevant. We really the goal here is to subsist on a minimal, and in many indigenous ways, this is the time of the ancestor in training. The bones begin to whisper, the veil thins, the elder becomes transparent like smoke. It's when we live in between worlds, preparing to enter the great cycle again. It's not a stage to be feared, it's to be honored. And so these are the four stages. Understanding this cycle of life heals us from the modern rifts of disconnection from nature, creating a culture of well-being, honoring rites of passage, aligned ourselves with the cycles of nature. However, we live in a society that seems to only emphasize the second stage: getting, acquiring, becoming, collecting, adding more. No? And then there's almost like nothing to look forward after the second stage. It's like retire and die. That's the big game plan. But no. There is a whole internal terrain to explore on the third stage, and that is very much worth living for. And this is menopause. As women go through these 4 stages in our monthly cycle every month, can you see the parallels? Can you see how the moon also does this dance? So how do we bring restoration and vitality to the wisdom years? How do we prepare in our 30s and 40s to arrive to this place? This is the idea of this series of videos now. One of the main roots of women's health issues is this idea of possession, this idea that we're here to do a bunch of things, no? Always wanting more. It's like nothing is ever enough. We are wired to constantly want more. And so for us to start preparing, we need to understand not only the dance of the 5 elements, but the concept of duality, of polarities, of the yin and yang. And this is when we enter the world of hormones and the language of hormones. For hormones, there's some that do something, and then there's another one that will counterbalance. So what is a hormone? A hormone is a substance secreted in one part of the body that will circulate through fluids to another part of the body and will influence a particular tissue to a new activity level. And it's either going to calm it or activate it. Hormones will keep you awake. Hormones will make you sleep. Hormones will get you active. Hormones will slow you down. It's a pattern. No absolutes. All is relative. They're building hormones and they're lightening hormones. They're hormones that are going to be grounding and nourishing and building. And they're going to be the opposite ones that are going to be stimulating and motivating. And we need both. And we need to ingest foods that will keep this dance alive in us. At 35, sex hormones start to decline, and they plunge by 50. Sex hormones are estrogen and progesterone, some of them, and they're building hormones. In Ayurveda, we call them brahmana. They're grounding, nourishing, building. They promote stability. And then we have stress hormones, like cortisol and adrenaline, and those are stimulating. They're the other kind, the other coin, the other side of the coin. They're yin in nature. They're langana in Sanskrit. They are going to be stimulating and motivating and lightening. So for our purposes, we want to speak a little bit about, making a little break, we're going to talk about estrogen's agenda. Estrogen is a building hormones, building the lining of the uterus every month. And then we have progesterone, which is estrogen's best friend, who's going to be supporting that agenda without letting it go out of control. So progesterone is always going to be the one curbing estrogen. And so every tissue has a precursor that builds hormones and a receptor. As we generally understand, estrogen gets built in the ovaries, right? But also in the adrenals. And after menopause, or after a hysterectomy in fat tissue, in muscle tissue. And so progesterone is going to be keeping estrogen from building too much, because when we have too much estrogen, we become estrogen dominant, and that's when we experience excess growths and masses and excess bleeding and fibroids. And so then we want to talk a little bit about the stress hormones, cortisol especially. This is an incredible hormone because it allocates our vital resources, our prana, our blood, as a response mechanism, as an energy to save your life. And it comes from places like your digestive system, like your libido, your reproductive organs. However, if we live a life that we don't want to live, if we live a life full of stress and trauma, then our vital resources get robbed by stress. After a traumatic incident, cortisol and adrenaline usually shoot up, right? This is when body's actually activating those mechanisms of survival. But once that trauma event passes, once the scare passes, cortisol remains vigilant, circulating through the tissues, hyper aware. So you can, and this is the way the body protects you, so you can potentially see more threats. But what happens is that we start perceiving normal events as threats when we live under a stress response. And so cortisol keeps increasing, making us in constant vigilance. And this is the basics of trauma response lodged in the cells of the body. Cortisol is a very interesting hormone. And what it can do is actually, it can take away our immunity. It can take away the earth element from the body. And so if we are constantly dominated by stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, this will rob calcium from the bones. This is why it's so important during menopause to really work on maintaining a very healthy levels of stress in our lives. So how do we bring a sense of restoration to the wisdom years, to the menopause years? There's a saying, I think by Dostoevsky, something like the second half of a person's life is made up of nothing but the habits he or she has acquired during the first half. So we can have a much smoother menopause if we have established healthy habits earlier on. Remember, we spoke before about warm and moist climate, about the circadian rhythms and the importance of following them, not only for menopause, but for later in life. So this is the idea of governing the balance between opposites, no? The language of duality, the yin and the yang hormones, the two main set of hormones, stress and sex, estrogen, progesterone, cortisol, oxytocin. And so we go on to the bucket syndrome, this theory of in our bodies, in our lives, we have two buckets of hormones, the sex hormones and a bucket of stress hormones. And we are born with the right amount on each bucket, and they have a clear balance to influence one another. Brahmana, Langana. Too much building, heaviness, too much Langana. Much motivation, anxiety, insomnia, dryness, irregular periods. So we want to keep these two buckets even through the life. So what happens around 35 years old? Progesterone and estrogen start to decrease. And around 50, there is a tremendous drop in both hormones. So then what happens if at 35, stress levels don't drop? This is when we start seeing women paying attention to their health. Maybe realizing, hey, I'm not completely invincible, no? And if the stress levels don't get regulated by the time we're 50, we are now in serious depletion. More stress, more insomnia, more anxiety, more bone loss, lack of libido. So then we take things and we start seeing these side effects of those things we take. And we're not addressing really the causes. If we're trying to treat digestive disorders, mental disorders, and we keep allowing the cortisol to take away vital resources, long-term, those systems are going to be very injured, and it's going to take a while to turn them around. So ideally, we want to figure out how to reduce stress levels. And this we do with life choices, amigas. So now this is an important question that puts everything in perspective. that reinforces this idea of interconnectivity of the macro and the micro, of indigenous thought in the context of Ayurveda. How many people you know that you have somebody in your life, let's say, that is extremely dysfunctional on many levels? How many people you know that can be so dysfunctional on so many different levels, that person in your life or that you know affects their community deeply because of their dysfunctionality? And now let's reflect on someone that you know, but that is the opposite, that actually has been able to take really good care of themselves. And so then how much can that person that has been really cultivating themselves can affect others, right? Positively, their kids, their families. How many people can get support from a person like that? It's huge. It's vital, because all us humans are in relationship. We are a tapestry of connective tissue. So there is a tremendous benefit with any amount that we put in our physical health and in our mental health to better ourselves, so that we can benefit and ripple that effect into our communities, into our families, into our neighbors. So from 35 to 50, we are hardwired to be able to deal with less and less stress. It's amazing. If you're like in your 40s and 50s, you probably can attest to this. Like, it's incredible how resilient the body is, even during menopause and beyond. But we are now able to deal less and less with bullshit, right? And that's why we have, if we are incapable of dealing with more stress, this is then we have night sweats, insomnia. Another thing happens when this goes long enough and we're super stressed out constantly, and there's not enough ground force or quality to support this imbalance. So what happens is, all steroid hormones, progesterone, estrogen, they're all made from cholesterol. And cholesterol is made in the liver. Your liver makes cholesterol 24/7. So the body is going to start prioritizing stress hormones for survival. For the body, if there's a choice where resources are going to go, they're going to go with the stress hormone. Trust me. So we're always going to be freaked out and upset. Constant irrigation of cortisol and all the systems. So because we live in a state of fight and flight response, the body is going to need more stress hormones. So then what happens? If we have not been able to self-regulate, to live a life that is healthier in a way for our mental health, for our nervous system, you're constantly in this kind of fight-flight response. What does the body do? The body needs more stress hormones. So then what happens? You have your reserve of the bucket of sex hormones, right? Estrogen, progesterone. Well, this is something incredible. Progesterone can shapeshift. Progesterone can become cortisol. This is like incredible. So what happens is this depletes sex hormones even more, because progesterone, your very good friend that helps estrogen, can become cortisol. And so then now you live in a constant stretch and you're depleting precious sex hormones to support the making of more cortisol. So if we don't have enough progesterone, then we're not going to have the modulation and support that estrogen needs. Therefore, estrogen is on its own, and then we become estrogen dominant. Weight gain, masses, cancer. It's insidious. Whew. So the endocrine system governs hormones, and this system governs secretion of hormones. And so what they do is we have our glands and organs, and ovaries and testes and thyroid and the parathyroid and the pancreas and the pituitary, adrenals, and the heart. Something that I was learning from this class is that in 1984, the heart was classified also as an endocrine organ as well as a circulatory organ. So the heart also secretes hormones. So all these organs, all these glands can get under supported when we live a very stressful life for long enough. And heart conditions are the number one killer of women over 40. Stress. This is the order of the glands that get hit. So pay attention to this. When you are accumulating stress, your glands are going to start suffering, right? The first one that goes, the adrenals. Those thumb-sized little glands that live on the back, on the top of your kidneys. The second one that's going to get hit is the insulin production portion of your pancreas. And the third one is going to be the thyroid. And then everything else goes. So, for the purposes of the life that we're living right now, let's say that we want to correct the damage. How do we know if the adrenals are affected? Adrenals are a source of estrogen, of cortisol, of DHEA, of progesterone. And from menopause on, the adrenals kind of pick up all the work that the ovaries were doing. The ovaries will stop producing estrogen, the adrenals take over. So how do we know if our adrenals are exhausted? We can get testing from blood and saliva, but the levels can change at any minute during the day, so it's hard. But it's much easier to assume that your adrenals are fatigued if you sleep enough and you're always tired. Tiredness that doesn't go away. Exhaustion. Then how do we know if the insulin portion of your pancreas is not working well? Weight gain around the middle, visceral fat. Long-term stress equals weight gain around the middle. And then shame comes into play, no? Because all of a sudden you're seeing this pouch, this belly, and it just came out of nowhere from one week to another. And so then it's embarrassing and it's confounding and it's frustrating, but then that will stress you more. So then that will stress the adrenals even more. So right amount of exercise is very important. Too much exercise increases cortisol. And then the third is the thyroid, right? And this is a total pandemic of thyroid issues. In my experience, it's rare to have hypothyroid, it's mostly hyperthyroid. So treatment is the same for both. Rest. We look at the liver, the brain, the gut. The thyroid problem is a very holistic thing. So each constitution has their own life challenges, right? If we come back to talk about the doshas, remember, Pitta, fire, very ambitious, goal-oriented force, very present in our society, very present. The Pitta mind is sharp, is strong. You probably know a lot of Pitta people. But the Pitta body type is more delicate. For Pitta people, we identify a lot with the mind. We tend to think they're very strong because their minds are very strong. But the body's not so much. And so the body catches up. And it gets a little indigestion and skin issues. And the mind is, shut up, put a plug on it, move on. Move on towards the goal. And so the body now is in full inflammation. And the Pitta individual usually really needs a life or death experience to change, trust me. So medicine for Pitta is to surrender to the pace of the body. And that can be so annoying. This is my own experience in the last year and a half. So learning to surrender to the pace of the body is a realization that the body is not as invincible as we thought. Living in integrity. Making choices that you don't feel are entrapping you in a life that you don't want to live. Rest as much as you can. Tend and befriend women in circles like this. And so what do? There's options. There's hormonal treatments, right? So what happened with synthetic hormones? Tons of side effects. Bioidentical hormone treatment. What is the dosage? Dosages becomes very complicated, but not impossible. I'm not against it at all. And the last one is put a hole in the bucket. Remember the 2 buckets. Abhyanga, self-oiling massage, will cue and break the cycle, will calm the nervous system and stop this crazy cycle when we start perceiving normal events as threats. Pranayama, the breathing, expansion of the breath. Dinacharya, we're going to talk a little bit about the change of our daily habits. All that, nutrition and exercise and connecting with nature. And then if none of that works, really, we can move on to bioidentical hormones, and that's completely fine. So on the next video, we will move on to practices to help balance those buckets. And those are directly speaking pranayama, breathing exercises. So I'll see you on the next video.